Mic check. Turn it down that a little. Yeah, yeah, that's fine. That's fine. In fact, do you want to hold this, Mandy? Yeah, thank you. Okay, welcome everybody. We are going to go ahead and get started today. We have a lot of great information to share with you guys, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time and get it all in. So we're going to get going here. It's 12 o'clock. Welcome to everyone in person. Welcome to everyone watching online as well. It's nice to see Mother Nature cooperated today. We got some rain, which is much needed, and so no one's missing anything outside right now. My name is Justin Van Houten. I am an owner and an advisor here at Compass Financial. And it's good to see a lot of familiar faces here and also some new faces. So we have some people here from Heartland Co-op. Thanks for joining us. And we have some regular faces too. That's awesome. Before I get started, a quick reminder, every month we do one of these educational events, and our next event in April is on Social Security, and that is April 11th, and it's 7 keys to maximizing Social Security benefits. So just an FYI, that's what's out there next month. I'm going to make introductions here and get started. We have 2 speakers joining us today. Matt Gardner will be joining us. Matt's right over here. Matt from Gardner Law Firm, appropriately titled. And then also Mike Nelson will be joining us. Mike's a land agent with People's Company. So, and for Mike, farm runs deep in his family, and Mike is a farmer as well. So, last but not least, we have our Compass team here. And so I know people are kind of spread out, but Steve Connard, right back there. Steve's an advisor and an owner here as well. Michelle Bjorkren, not here right now. Okay, also an advisor. Hannah Mason, a lot of you know her. That's my assistant. Joe Waniger, Nancy Economist, Alan Holstein, Cheryl Hurst. And then we have Julie Greer, who a lot of you know. Julie is out of the office today. And Guy Lehman and Caleb Pearson, other advisors and owners here, they're out enjoying vacation. So I think that was almost everybody. And then we have our newest team member, and her name is Mandy Rhodes. And Mandy has a little background in farming too. So Mandy, why don't you tell them a little bit about your story? Is that on? Yeah.
Hello, it's really great to be here. This topic is so near and dear to my heart because I come from a generational farming family. And I ran across this picture of me. I know you can't all see it, but it's me 30 years ago tugging my feeder calf around the lot. So I also wanted to make a quick introduction. When I say generational farming, my daughter, she is sitting here at this table, Julia Rhodes. And I'm extremely proud of her for being continuing that. She raises goats. She works with farmers as an agronomist. So that is just a very near and dear topic to my heart. And I'm glad that you're all here because I've seen families getting broken up over this topic and experienced it firsthand. So having a plan in place does make it a lot easier for everyone involved when you're not here anymore. It keeps your family together. So thanks for coming today, and thanks.
I'll take that. Thanks, Mandy. All right, so format for today, we'll have about 45 minutes of presentation, and then we'll leave time at the end for Q&A for any questions you guys have. There's notepads in front of you if there's information you want to write down or there's a question you want to jot down for the end. So feel free to use those. The impetus for this event is time and again, people walk in our door, whether they're existing clients or they're new people we haven't met yet, and they have questions about farming. It could be you're a current farmer, or it could be you're someone who may be inheriting a farm, right? Or it could be some other relation to you, friend, neighbor, etc. And there's a lot of questions where people walk in, and I wish we could have had a conversation 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, whatever the time frame would have been, right? Sometimes decisions have already been made. And so rather than being reactive, I'd like to be proactive and just try to get really good information out there for you guys that's going to help you as it relates to farm succession planning and things to consider with that. So farming, it's kind of like owning a small business, right? Or a large business, depending on the scale of your farm. But there's a lot of things you're in control of, and there's a lot of things to consider. But the most important thing is that you have a plan. Everyone needs to have a plan because life happens. Things unexpectedly can pop up that you had not planned for, and all of a sudden, this is playing out, and you either had a good plan or you didn't. And again, maybe you're walking in my door and we're wishing we could have had a conversation earlier, right? So a couple things to consider. I'll try to stay out of the way here. Reasons for a succession plan. Well, farms are very complex operations. A lot of times, as you guys know, they can involve multiple family members, maybe multiple generations. There's a lot of considerations. There's the land component, but also what business lines, row crops, cattle, hogs, etc. Trucking lines, technology. There's all different directions people are going now, right? And a thing to think about when you start thinking about succession is how are your goals, needs, wants, interests going to be aligned with who you're passing it down to? Is there alignment? If there's not, that's something you want to have a conversation about. But getting together and having a farm succession plan, it's going to give you an opportunity to have a blueprint that everyone can follow during the time you're here, but also in the future when you may not be. And so it's a way to smooth that ride and hopefully allow your heirs to have a smooth transition. First, we're going to start and just talk a bit about if you're someone who owns the farm yourself, what are your goals and needs? And sometimes that gets lost in the shuffle. I've seen a lot of that because we're thinking about the next generation, which is important, but how are you going to pay for your retirement? Farming is a business, so how is it going to pay you now? How will it pay you later down the road? And so what level of income is required? How much money will it take you to live in retirement? That's something to think about. And maybe you know that, maybe you don't. Also, where are you going to get the income from? Because there's lands, there is your farm itself. Maybe you're going to get rental income from it. But if you're not planning on selling the land, then do you have investments? Is it going to be Social Security? Is it going to be other sources? But you really want to get a plan and have that laid out. Debt is a reality. But the less debt you have in retirement, that will really help you too, because that means money that comes in, you get to keep it. You're not beholden to anyone else anymore, right? So that's a very powerful thing. Another thing to consider with income is taxes. So as farmers, you meet with your CPA every year, every quarter, however frequently you're meeting, and they may be saying, okay, what can we do to lower your taxes? And I mean, raise your hand. Who here likes paying taxes? No takers. I thought I might get one. Just kidding. So no one wants to pay taxes now. One thing that means down the road for you is if you keep your taxable income lower, then that means your Social Security benefit down the road will be lower too, because it's based on your taxable income. So your Social Security benefit may not be representative of the money you really made. It's going to be representative of income you were showing. So that's something to keep in mind. Taxable income can affect your health insurance premiums. So depending when you retire, if you're paying for your own insurance, meaning you're not age 65, you haven't made it to Medicare yet. If you can control your taxable income, that's going to really help you out with healthcare. So touching quickly on investments, if you didn't do anything else and you're going to have one type of investment account, everyone would want to have a Roth IRA. That's a very important type of investment account. It's the most tax advantaged account you can have. So if you have an ability and you have earned income, a Roth IRA is the right one for you, okay? There's other types of accounts and we can get into that more, but the big thing is you just want to make sure you have some different buckets of income for when you retire, whether it's rent from the land, whether you plan to sell something, whether it's payments from heirs, whether it's investments. Moving on down to how do you want this succession plan to play out? It's very important you update all your financial metrics so you have a good idea of what the farm looks like. What's your net worth? What are the cash flows? What's your solvency? What level of debt do you have? You want to identify heirs and their roles, right? So you have people that may already be involved in the farm, family members, ranchers, whoever it might be. Well, are they someone that's going to continue on in the farm, or are they someone who will not continue on? That's an important thing to know. Do they have a genuine interest in continuing the operation? That's another important consideration. If they're siblings, one sibling may be interested, one may not. If someone isn't interested and they're going to want to sell their piece of the farm down the road, and you have one or two more heirs, siblings that maybe want to keep it, if they divvy it up, you know something's getting sold. One quick solution is you can use life insurance. And if you had a life insurance policy, then that can pay for the sibling that wants to just be paid off and move on. And then that means you don't have to sell any of the land or the farm for the existing members that want to hold on to it, right? So that's a quick solution, a consideration in that scenario. How will the heirs work together? Who will be the decision maker in the group if there's multiple heirs? Also something to consider. This bottom one here, communication and family dynamics. That's a big one that we see a lot of. Sometimes people don't get what they expected as an heir or what they wanted, and that can cause some conflict in families. And one way to avoid that on the front end, and again, be proactive, is to have conversations and set expectations ahead of time. Communicate with heirs or the heir, whatever the case is, and let them know what your expectations are. Let them know what the plan is. And if there are issues that arise, they'll be able to discuss those at that time. It's a process that can be pretty straightforward. I'm going to just run through a couple scenarios. So if you're a single heir, probably the easiest one, a big key point here, and I'm sure Matt will touch on this, but we want to make sure any estate documents are aligned with the desired outcome. So if you have a will or a trust, make sure it's up to date, make sure it's set the way you want it. Also, this bottom one, consider if any family members, individuals that would be involved have expectations which don't align with how it's going to play out. So in other words, who's going to be angry? Who's going to be mad? If someone's not getting what they want or what they think they want, better to address that now and communicate with them on that than for it to be a surprise down the road. Now let's talk about multiple heirs, which is a pretty common situation. Again, expectations are important. If they're having issues, sometimes it's helpful to bring in a third party just to be a peacemaker. And that's something else you can plan ahead on. And so who would be your peacemaker? Well, it could be someone at the bank. It could be a family friend. It could be your financial advisor. It could be any number of people. Dividing the assets. I talked about it a little bit, but understand, does everyone want to hold on to the farm? And is that what you want? And let's make sure that's in alignment. If it's not going to be the case, let's plan on it ahead of time and also consider mineral rights, gas rights, rental properties, any other lines of business or lines of income within the farm. I'll share one quick story that is something that happened, and this is one reason to think about these things and communicate. Had some 3 siblings walk in the door, did not know them from Adam, had never worked with them or their family. Parents had passed, they were inheriting the farm. Parents had the best of intentions. Parents didn't want to pay taxes and didn't want to mess with probate. And so what they had done is they had, prior to, I think it was the dad was last alive, and prior to the dad passing, he retitled everything into one of the kids' names. Well, fast forward to the passing, and the kids come in and they had plans of everything they're going to do. And I had to talk to them about something called cost basis. And some of you are probably familiar with that. But cost basis, you buy something, you buy land, you buy a farm, over time it appreciates in value. Well, when that, if I die and I pass that on to my heir, they get a stepped up cost basis, meaning if it grew and it's You got $500,000 of growth over the years in it. They don't have to pay taxes on that growth. They get a stepped up value to the value of the land, the farm, the day I passed. But guess what? You don't get stepped up cost basis if you retitle something to someone's name before you die. So I had to have that talk with that family. And that's a great example of, I wish I would have met them whenever that decision was made, right? So things we want to be proactive on. Other ways to handle a multiple heir is a structured purchase. Maybe one of the heirs buys out another one of the heirs, right? But it comes back to that goal is, if it's a farm, if it's a century farm and we want to keep it going, we want to keep it in the family, we got to have a plan so it doesn't get divvied up down the road. Also, if there is a situation where people are selling, when you're dividing the farmland, it could make it less valuable. So if everyone wants to sell their third, well, selling a third might not carry the same value as if that land was together. So again, is there a solution where instead of a third, because one person wanted to sell, can we come up with a different way to get that one person their money, and then the other two keep the farm intact, or sell and it's worth more, right? Because it's more intact. So that's another consideration. Another scenario is if there's no heirs. This is rare, but say you're a farming family and you have no kids, or your kids predeceased you, and there's no one else you really want to pass it on to. Well, what's the plan then? One, you can hire a third-party manager and someone to continue running it, and the income would go somewhere to whoever you'd want that to go to. But you got to answer the question, can the farm support a third-party manager? You can network with other farmers, neighbors. There's usually no shortage of people interested in the land, right? And Mike will get to that here in a second. And then also, you can sell it. If that's the goal or the want, you can always sell it. So how am I doing on time there? Okay. So just to wrap up, I think some of the biggest things to keep in mind are communication and planning ahead, because life throws you all sorts of curveballs, and just like with farming and the weather. But if you have a plan and you're communicating, then when the unexpected happens, you're okay. And communicating isn't just something where, as the farm owner, me, my spouse and I, we go and we figure out what we want. Communicating is speaking to the next generation, right? Or anyone that's going to be impacted by it, and making sure there's great alignment there and they're on board with it. One other quick note here, and then I'll pass it on to Matt. I mentioned insurance briefly. Insurance can be a great tool to be used. And we talked about investments a little bit, and so are annuities. Another thing that walks in our door that I see sometimes, and we sell insurance here, we sell annuities, we do investments, we do all of it, right? But sometimes people walk in the door and in farming communities, and they've been sold an annuity, and maybe they didn't need it. Maybe it wasn't a great fit. Now, there's a lot of times it is, so I'm not knocking it, and we use them sometimes. It's a tool. Every tool it can be used properly, it can be used improperly. But if all that someone does is they sell insurance and annuities, and then it's like they got a hammer and every problem looks like a nail. And so I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because there's a lot of people that do that and do it well. But if you're working with someone and they're really pushing you hard on an annuity, just make sure it makes sense and ask questions. Because again, sometimes it's a great solution, but sometimes it's not. And I've had a lot of those cases walk through the door. I saw a couple of people nodding their head as I'm bringing it up. So, all right. Moving on to the estate planning side of things, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Gardner. Mike's on.
Thanks, Justin. Well, I have 15 minutes to break down a lot of challenging topics and some not always simple issues. So I'm going to do my best to do in 15 minutes. But Justin did a good job kind of setting the groundwork as far as some of the things that we want to be looking at when you're talking about estate planning. And more importantly, when you're dealing with farmland. I'm going to first kind of just do a general discussion of the will versus the trust option. That's a whole segment by itself without even getting into the farmland issue. But what it breaks down into, when you have a will, your estate will go through what we call the probate process. Probate, for those of you that haven't had any involvement, is where a court proceeding is involved, where your assets are filed with the court, a listing of your assets, the values of your assets, and it's kind of subject to the court control. In addition to the court control and oversight, you also have court costs. Probate costs is kind of what we refer to them as, and that's going to be your court costs, that's going to be the attorney fees, yay for attorney, and your executor fees. If you kind of take those costs together, pool them all up, it's about a 4.2% cost to go through the probate process. Now, farmland is a little bit special in that regard, in that farmland has had some significant growth over the past 20, 30 years. And so farmland values are very high. So given the fact that we have high farmland values, that means probate costs, which are tied to the size of your estate, are also going to be higher as well. And so for those individuals that are in a situation where they have farmland values that are high, or just the total estate is high, they're not real keen on paying probate expenses. So that's where we have the alternative to a will. Instead of going through probate, we have a trust. We refer to it as a living trust. Sometimes you'll hear it referenced as a revocable trust. Same thing, different terminology, but basically it's a type of an instrument that allows you to transfer your property to the beneficiaries that you've selected in a way, in a manner that you've set out. So it does everything that a will does, who your beneficiaries are, who's in charge, but it does it without going through probate. So as a result, you don't have the public nature of probate, where your assets are filed with a court because it's no court involved. You don't have the court costs that are involved. So you have an opportunity to save some expenses. So that, in just a kind of a high level overview, kind of explains what the difference between a will and a living trust will be. It's not a right way and a wrong way, it's just a different way. Just because your neighbor does a will or a trust doesn't mean that you should do a will or a trust. But it can provide some options for you if you wanted to have those issues addressed. From a tax planning or asset protection, a will or a trust doesn't provide any unique benefits. So I can do the exact same plan with a will or with a living trust. So it's not a special tax vehicle. From an asset protection, it's the same thing. Whether you have a will or a trust, you'll have the same issues involved with asset protection. So it's just simply avoids probate. That's the difference when you're looking at a will versus a trust. One of the key things we also want to keep in mind, in addition to deciding whether you want to use a will or a trust, is to make sure your assets are properly titled. And since we're talking about farmland, we're going to focus on farmland. But there's different ways that you can own farmland. For example, you can own land just in your name alone. Perfectly fine in that situation. To transfer it at your death, we'd have to have a will to get it to your beneficiaries. Another way you can own farmland is by joint owners. And there's basically two ways that you can own farmland or any land jointly with somebody. One way you own it is with joint tenants with rights of survivorship. If that language is on the deed for that property, then what happens at the death of one of the joint owners is that it automatically passes to the surviving joint owner. Doesn't matter what your will says. So your will could say, I give all of my farmland to Bob, but if you own that land jointly, it's not going to go to Bob unless Bob's the joint owner. So we want to make sure we are careful about who we put in as a joint owner of farmland. Another way you can jointly own farmland is what we refer to as tenants in common. What that means is that you own a partial interest of land, but your interest when you die, instead of passing down to the joint owner that you own it with, it's going to go according to your estate plan. So if you have a will that says the farm goes to Bob, well, your half interest or whatever you own in that farm is going to go to Bob. It doesn't go to the joint owner. But that's a key distinction of the ways that you can own property together. Joint tenants with rights of survivorship or tenants in common. If you use a trust like we were talking about before, we'd also have to make sure we retitle that land in the name of that trust. If we don't do that step, then you've paid for a nice piece of paper that doesn't accomplish the goal of avoiding probate. Another issue you want to be mindful of when you own property is if you own property as joint tenants with rights of survivorship with a spouse, which a lot of people will do, should you pass away before your spouse, that property will go to your spouse, which is perfectly fine. And this is a delicate issue, and I'm going to tread lightly on this, but if your spouse were to get married again after you passed away, you have a new spouse that's going to be entering into the picture, and all of a sudden, things can get a little bit sideways sometimes. The second marriages, or third marriages it may be, can certainly be a challenge. And so that's something we want to keep in mind as we do the planning. Planning for potential remarriage. We certainly understand farmland is more than just dirt. It's your family history. It's something that's been in the family for many people. It's been in their family for generations. And wanting to make sure that that continues on potentially for your beneficiaries is a goal that a lot of people want to accomplish, and we want to make sure that we plan appropriately. So when you're looking at some different ways to transfer property on, Justin kind of touched on some of those, but you may have a situation where some beneficiaries have interest in farmland and some beneficiaries don't. They see cash and they can see sports cars that they can buy with that cash, and that land doesn't have that same appeal sometimes. But for some people, it's their way of a lifestyle. It's how they live. It's how they make money to provide for their family. So for them, keeping that farm is important. So you potentially have some balancing interests. Some people want cash, some people want the land. And it's not always easy to divide out who gets the cash, who gets the land. Like Justin indicated, life insurance is a way that you can kind of balance that out, where you can say, all right, I'm going to give Mary the farm, and in return, I'm going to give Bob life insurance. So that way they both have something of value that they can walk away with. Otherwise, they're potentially going to be in a situation where they're going to have some disagreements. I'm dealing with one right now where we have 3 beneficiaries. 2 of them want to continue running the farm. 1 doesn't want to. They don't get along with their siblings, which is not that uncommon anymore. And they just want the cash. They don't live in Iowa. They don't have the same connections. The other ones live on the farm. They want to continue the farm. And so we're trying to balance, how do we deal with that? Now, in this situation, it was grandparents that had passed this down, but there's no mechanism there for us to work a way to divide out this farm. And so potentially they're all 3 going to become co-owners of this farm. And then we're going to have to deal with management. Again, Justin touched on that a little bit earlier, but the issues are going to be, all right, we're going to co-own this property. Who's going to choose which tenant we're going to have on that property? Who's going to decide what the rental rate is for that property? Oh, we need to have the fences replaced. How are we going to take care of that? Do we need to replace the fences? Do we need to do some tiling? Well, that's not cheap. Do we want to use the money for that? Or I'd rather just sell the farm and get the cash. So those are just a few examples that you'll be working with if you have joint owners of farm. And that creates a challenge because you got a lot of people with different ideas, and balancing that is going to be a challenge. One option is that you say, all right, instead of giving it out to the 3 owners or whoever, however many, we're going to keep it in a trust. So that way we have one person in charge, the trustee. They're going to manage that farm. They're going to choose the farm manager. They're going to choose the tenant. They're going to choose how things are operating at so that it's more of an efficiency. And that job can be a challenge. For somebody that doesn't have any farm background, they don't know that they need to contact somebody at Peoples to help them out with that process. They don't know that they need to work with the ASCS office to get the necessary paperwork done on a routine basis. So those are some challenges when you're dealing with having somebody in charge of that process. Sometimes you want to put in a situation where you'll say, all right, I want to give a particular beneficiary an option to purchase that farmland. That's a great idea. If they want to cap the farm, they can buy it. And the others get cash because of the proceeds. They're getting that cash. So everybody wins. Somebody gets the farm, somebody gets cash. And that's a great idea, but we want to think carefully about how we want to implement that idea. For example, do we want to have that individual pay full fair market value for that farm? Or do we want to give them a discount because it's a family member? Potentially, we want to provide a little of a bonus for them to allow them to be stepping into that situation without having to pay full price for that. Okay, that's one option. Next option is, okay, how are they going to pay for that? Farmland isn't cheap anymore, and most people don't have that kind of money just sitting in their bank account. If they do, great, but most people don't have that type of cash readily available. Well, okay, you can go to the bank, you can go to Farm Credit, you can get different loans to help do that. And that's certainly an option, but sometimes that doesn't happen overnight. Or maybe they weren't quite ready for that. Maybe they just purchased another farm and their cash is tied up, their loan options are limited, and they just don't have the ability to go and get a loan right now. All right, do we want to keep this option open for a period of time? So instead of saying we have to do that within 90 days of my death, we'll keep it open for 5 years so that they'll continue as a status quo for a few years. And then anytime over the next 5 years, once they get their financial house in order, then they can move forward with getting that loan so that they can move forward with that farm purchase. Sometimes people will say they want to identify land that goes to child A, land goes to child B, and land that goes to child C. Again, that can work fine. Some of the challenge you're dealing with is farm over here is farm A today might be worth X dollars, but down the road, it could be higher. You could have a highway that ends up being constructed right through the middle of it and takes part of it away. It can have some erosion. It could have some other issues that can impact the value. Maybe there's a development that's going to go in right next door that's going to increase the value of that farm. So there's different issues you got to be mindful of. And maybe you'll sell part of it. Maybe your next door neighbor wanted to buy another 20 acres, and so you carve off a piece. And so that land that you had originally directed towards one of the kids is all of a sudden become reduced because we have a smaller farm because we sold it. So those issues about giving certain land to individuals. Justin touched briefly on it, so I won't go into too much, but about the stepped up basis. And that's really a critical point that he emphasized, and I want to emphasize as well. Basically, when you sell land, the difference between the price that you paid for that land and the sales price is going to be subject to capital gains tax. However, if you receive property that was inherited, that you inherit property, the value of that farm at the date of the death of that individual is the new cost basis. So that potentially takes all that growth and appreciation of that farm and allows you to sell that without having to worry about capital gains tax. So it's just something you want to be mindful of when you're thinking about gifting land away or keeping it in part of your estate. Well, my 15 minutes went by pretty quickly, and there's a lot of stuff that are my notes that I didn't get to, but in the interest of time, we just want to kind of give you some basic ideas and some concepts to think about. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. And there's so much to this topic and so much that we could talk about here. I think that in the future, what we'd like to do is even expand this out and make it a larger event, but this is our first time doing this, so we wanted to test it out with our weekly or our monthly educational 1-hour events. So next up, Mike Nelson, going to give us some updates on land and all other exciting things.
Hello, appreciate you letting me speak. Mike Nelson, work at People's Company, been selling real estate full time for 24 years now. Live on a farm in Lucas County, so I farm a little bit, not like the big boys, but believe in the farm lifestyle. So what I'll speak on is the status of the farm market, kind of what's going on value wise, and then some trends I see in the markets, and then also pitfalls and some of the things we see as far as when we're selling farm assets, whether it's a traditional sale or a farm auction. Some of the things that we deal with that are pitfalls or challenges to try to avoid. So the farm market in general is strong. Despite the media, despite everything, values are still as high as they've been. And I'm primarily focusing on tillable or ground that's best sorted for corn beans, the best ground that's out there. We really haven't seen prices back off. I think the only thing that's really changed is the low quality properties are slowly, and I say slowly, starting to back off in value. The high quality stuff is continuing to bring top end money and at times record prices. In northern Iowa, you'll see values in the $12,000 to $17,000 per acre range, and there has been some sales, especially lately, past $25,000 an acre. Just tremendous numbers. In southern Iowa, where I live, on ground like that, you'll see $6,000 to maybe $9,000 an acre. But lately, we have also seen some, which are record prices when you start seeing farms sell past $12,000 an acre. These are just figures and numbers that we have not seen in the market. So what's pushing that? Inventory is very tight. So the simple dynamic of supply and demand, supply continues to be fairly low. The market still has a ton of cash, a ton of money in it, and a ton of money on the sidelines. If somebody sells a farm up north, they can have $1 million very quickly, and all of a sudden they're $1 million buyer. So in my world, used to be somebody had $1 million was a big deal. Now it's so common that there's so many buyers out there that literally have that much in cash that they're looking to reinvest. So that's just continues to push the market, continues to push values along. So what are some of the trends? This is a different environment this year. Last year, at the start of last year, if you're the farmer, you were looking at $6 corn and maybe $15 bean prices. This year, starting the year, now you're looking at $4 corn and maybe beans that are 11.5. So what's happened is the margins for the farmer continue to get tighter, and they're beginning to get nervous because unless you own your land free and clear, if you're paying a strong cash rent, the reality is things are getting tighter. It's harder to make a living, and inputs have not changed. They've still stayed very strong. So moving forward, last year we had tremendous crops despite the drought. Farmers still put up at times record yields. This year we're just as dry, if not drier. So there's a lot of factors in the market. I don't know where it's going. If I'm a farmer, I'm a lot more cautious this year. And so what they're doing and what they will do this year is if they're going to buy a farm, they're going to focus on, they're willing to pay really good money, but they want to buy the best quality. So they're saving their cash for the best quality stuff, and the lower quality stuff will, I believe, will continue to back off because the farmers are just going to be more cautious in what they're putting money into. And investors are the same way. Everybody wants the good dirt if you're going to buy a production farm. So as far as estates and I guess my 2 cents and what we see, we deal with a lot of good families, and we deal with a lot of ugly situations that the estate planning may have not have been done as well. The biggest thing I would state is it's so uncomfortable to communicate. Estate planning is just, it's not terribly fun. But you need to be seeking wise counsel. You need to be talking to your attorneys, your tax advisors, your financial planners. And so many times, as far as communication, the family really should be communicating to the beneficiaries. And it's a very awkward conversation at times, and most people don't want to deal with it. But what happens is all of a sudden, mom and dad pass away, somebody ends up with the farm. Nobody knows who's the head decision maker. Nobody knows what's going on. And the family then starts to fight, and you can have some rough situations, as well as some of the points he mentioned. A lot of times with the farm families, one person would like to receive their money and get out of the situation. Some of the other ones may want to continue to farm. And it's oftentimes hard to figure out what a clean exit strategy is. So many times the family throws their hands up and says, we'll just sell the real estate, and they sell it all. And I'm not so sure that's always what mom and dad intended, but it's unfortunately where things go because it's the simplest solution to create a solution for everybody. A few other things, just remember, you got to update your estate planning. So what we see is it's not always the immediate mom and dad or the family creates a plan. It works fine. Like I have 3 brothers, there's 4 boys. The plan works great for us, but what happens is the plan wasn't thought through, the exit strategy weren't in place. So somebody gets a divorce, there's another spouse that the family doesn't care for, and they cause an issue in the situation. There's future generations of kids. So the estate planning, it needs to be updated periodically based on the family situation. And I think so many times people do it, and then, 5 years, 10 years go by, or if you're a farming family and they're expanding and they do a trucking operation, all of a sudden you have all these entities, but the planning hasn't addressed the whole situation, or it hasn't been updated to reflect the family change. And so that's where we see the biggest conflict. It's not the immediate family knows that mom and dad, or maybe it was communicated and they know what their wishes are. But all of a sudden you add different parts of the family that don't understand what the initial intention was, or the business model changes and it hasn't been updated. So a lot of times we're in the mix of that, trying to work with the attorneys to figure out how we sort it out and what assets get liquidated to create the solution so that the family can settle the matter and move on. So those are kind of my 2 cents. Better to asking questions, but
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. So we are, as Mike and Matt both kind of alluded to, there's a lot to cover here. And the numbers keep getting bigger when you're talking about the prices of land, the prices of running a farm. Families keep getting more complex, whether we're talking about kids, grandkids, divorces, remarriages, maybe multiple divorces, just complicating factors. Someone passes away early. So families are more complicated. The numbers are higher. Good reasons to start having a plan and start communicating, right? And who are people that can help you with that? Who are good resources? Obviously, estate attorneys, CPAs that you're using, financial planners or advisors like ourselves, just people that can come alongside you on that journey and give you advice, right? And give you advice that's not biased in any ways. So we are on schedule. We got time for some Q&A. Is there anyone here? Yes, absolutely. And we have people watching online, so I'll have you speak into the microphone so they hear your question.
I hear you talking about getting together financial planners, attorneys,
Mhm.
not backing down.
Mhm.
My question is, do you meet with them all together? I feel like I keep meeting with people individually, and then I'm left to kind of hold all the information.
That is a great question. Hopefully that came through online, but essentially, you have all these people you're working with as a farmer, all these people that are a part of your life, and the answer is collaborative is so much better, right? I know here is an example, what we do and what I would do is we want to speak to all the parties because you can't make these decisions in a silo. Right? Pun intended. Someone got it. But you can't make them in a silo because the estate attorney needs to know what's the intent of the family and how are we planning things financially? What should be in a trust, what shouldn't? Where are income sources, where are they coming from, right? A land broker, it's helpful for them to know what's going on. Your CPA, of course, needs to know what's the plan because income taxes, those are huge factors, not only while you're running the farm, but also in retirement. And so my answer to that is yes, be collaborative. Love sitting down with CPAs, estate attorneys, whoever it might be. Often we find ourselves as the advisor, we're kind of like the quarterback. We're doing the big picture planning with the family, figuring out the plan, and then it's passing off to each of those parties and they do their part. But we want to have alignment there, right? Just like we want to have great expectations and communication with our families on the succession plan, we want to have great communication, expectations, and alignment with all the people that have their hands in this decision and in this process. So great question. What other questions do we have? Yes.
This question is probably more for Mike, but anybody please answer. So if you're one of the beneficiaries, how do you best get the approximate land value?
Here you go, Mike.
So usually it defaults to the attorney and feel free to speak in, but the simple solution is to do an appraisal and hire an appraisal company to define value, which when they're doing the stepped up basis, they will need to define value at time of death. The other thing that we participate in is what we call broker price opinions, where it's just us doing a simple report that states, here's what we believe it's worth, similar to when you hear the word market analysis. It also defines value, or sometimes we'll have attorneys reach out to us and say, trying to create a solution. They'll say there's 1,000 acres, put a value in each, break this apart into different value dynamics so that the family can try to figure out how they can divide up the assets. If one of the parties wants to, if they're trying to distribute part to one party or somebody else, or figuring out what portion may need to be sold to generate enough cash to solve the problem, to separate it up. But I don't know if you have anything to add on that, but yeah.
Not much. And that's a good answer. The best way to find out the value is to sell it. But that's not always the route you want to go. Because the problem is you could do an appraisal and it's going to appraise at a certain dollar amount. And then all of a sudden you have a drought, you have grain prices go down, and all of a sudden that appraised value doesn't apply. So if you do an appraisal, then you kind of want to act fairly quickly from that appraisal. You don't want to delay a year or two down the road anyway.
Thanks, Matt. Other questions? Do we have any online, Alan? Okay. Okay, so we have a few minutes left. Couple closing comments here. One is I touched briefly on when I was talking about investment, and one of the other reasons that I wanted to do this event is something else I see when people walk in the door that have a farming background is we put our money into what we know, right? So if you're a farmer, you're putting money into land and buying more land and expanding the farm. Investing sometimes is kind of a secondary thing, and that's okay. But what you want to keep in mind is you want to be diversified down the road. Because for instance, healthcare is a big thing to plan on and think about. How are you going to pay for healthcare? Well, most people, when the time comes, or if you have a medical expense and you're retired, you don't want to have to sell land just to pay for that. So where's that money going to come from? and maybe you don't have enough cash rent for that, or maybe the income you used to receive from the farm or the CRP, whatever it might be, now it's going to the next generation. So that's where investments can fill in some of those gaps for you. And a Roth IRA, to say why that's so important, I said it's the most tax advantaged account. To the best of my knowledge, in this country, if you make money, there's really no ways to make money and not have to pay tax on it legally other than a Roth IRA. A Roth IRA, it's an investment account. You put in money that's after tax. So you've already paid tax on this money, okay? It's invested, it grows. You don't pay any tax on it while it's in the account. But here's the really cool thing about it. You never have to pay tax on the growth. So you're making money and not paying tax on it. And as far as I know, that's a hard thing to do in this country, right? So that's the power of a Roth IRA. And that's why if you didn't have any other type of account, it's a great starting place. And just one qualifier on that is you have to have earned income to put into it. So if you're already retired and you don't have retired, I shouldn't say that doesn't matter, but if you don't have earned income, you can't contribute to a Roth. So you have to have earned income, but as long as you have earned income, you can contribute to a Roth IRA. There's a contribution limit and there's other things, and I'm not going to get in the weeds, but if you don't have any other takeaway from an investment standpoint, one, it's good to have investments to balance out all your other income sources, and two, a Roth IRA is a great way to start with that if you don't already have one. If you're using one, that's awesome. Keep doing it. Steve, do you have anything to add? Yep, just turn that on.
I do. It's an anecdote, I guess, about our subject matter today on the importance of estate planning, especially if you're involved in a farm. I have a client who grew up on a farm, and she has two siblings. And my client herself has a son and several grandchildren. One of her siblings had a single son, her nephew, my client's nephew. And the third sibling never married, has no children, no heirs. And for years, I would meet with my client and she would lament the fact that they could not get her parents to do any serious estate planning for the farm. Her parents farmed themselves. They farmed the land into their 80s. Her father eventually got too ill to do it, eventually passed away. The nephew took over running the farm and made it clear that he would like to make his living on the farm, and no estate planning had been done. And so when her mother died, what ended up happening is they each got their third, she and her two siblings, and the ink was no sooner dry on the paperwork than she started getting a lot of pressure from her brother and her sister, my client did, that she ought to sell, my client ought to do what the two of them did and sell her shares to her nephew, her share of the farm to her nephew, at the same steeply discounted price that her brother sold to his own son, to her nephew. And she didn't think that that was fair. First said, well, can I do about this? I said, well, I don't think you can really do anything other than say no if that's not what you want to do. Well, ultimately, the pressure got to be so great that she ended up selling for a deeply discounted price to her nephew, and essentially her son's inheritance is taken a huge haircut in favor of his cousin, just because they saw no other way through it or around it, just because nobody wanted to do estate planning. So there's a lesson for you in how it can get really messy real quick.
Thanks, Steve. So another example of some of the interesting family dynamics that we see, and we kind of have a unique seat here because, and similar to Matt and Mike and their lines of work, we see so many of those stories come through our doors, right? And obviously, if it's a success story and everything goes well, that's wonderful. And we see those too, and that's excellent. And that means some really good planning was probably done. Some time was put into it, right? You get what you put into things, and it's no different than that, with this. I think Mike and Matt both touched on, it takes a little time and work up front to get through all these steps. And then there is some ongoing maintenance to update as life changes, whether beneficiaries change or how you want to divvy things up changes or just assets change. You get more land, you sell this, you buy that. You got to keep everything up to date. But, a little bit of, my grandma used to have the saying, what is it, an ounce of prevention? I'm blanking on that. What's the saying? Yeah, is worth a pound of cure, right? So it's very true with this as well. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We're on schedule here. As we wrap up, thank you for joining us today. Thank you to the new people that are here. Appreciate you being here. Hopefully you got something useful out of this. As I shared, I think this could be a larger event where we get into more detail on each of these areas, and we can do that at a future time. Feel free to reach out to any of us with questions. You can reach out to us here at Compass. You can reach out to Mike and Matt. We have their contact information as well. Also, Mike brought some really great material. It is sitting on top of the piano over there. There's a couple different brochures and various items there, so feel free to grab those on the way out. This was recorded, so if anyone wants to watch it or pass it on to someone let us know. We can get you the link. And again, I just appreciate you guys coming out. I know how valuable your time is. So thank you.